Okay, we're going to be concentrating on the color coding initially. So this is a stacking plan that we had finished up with on Tuesday, and that if I left click we can zoom in and you can see that we have tenants with different colors. All the color coding is done with this icon with the Q on it, or query configure. And we have different parts to the screen. The top part of the screen is where we actually build the color coding instructions. And then we have the action buttons beneath that, indicating whether we want to add or insert the instruction down below. And then in this list down below, we have all the current or the active color coding instructions. And you can see on line number 1, we're basically saying if the lease end equals 2010, then we are assigning it to a color, or really a frame, number 2. And I'm going to double left click on frame number 2, and it brings up a palette of colors. And so that number 2 is sort of a light blue. We have a lot of other colors and or patterns. You can have as many colors or patterns in the palette that you want, and we'll talk later on how you go about adding or customizing the colors, and that's done with this edit frames. You can see on line number 2, if the lease expires in 2011, then it's being assigned to frame number 1, which is green. And that, notice on the right hand side, the legend label is going to be 2011 or 2012 and so on. Okay, so the value or the color coding instruction can have a different label. Just like over here for number 9, we're saying that if the lease end is greater than 2017, then the label is really going to be 2018 plus. Okay, so let's talk about how to add these particular queries. I'm going to delete the ones that we have right now. I'm just highlighting all of them on the left hand side. I'm going to click on delete and delete them. Okay, so if I were to produce a stacking plan right now by clicking on OK, then we have no colors because we have deleted all the color coding instructions. So let's come back here to the query button, and we build these queries at the top. So we're saying if what? If the lease end date equals, and notice we have a lot of other conditions here, but we'll go with equal. If it equals 2010, then I want to assign it to a color. In this case, I want it to be green. And then we need to have some type of label. We'll just put in 2010. And then I click the add button and add it to the bottom. Okay, so this is the only active query that we have right now. So if I click on OK, then all those leases that expire in 2010 now are green. Okay, let's do the other years as well. So I'm going to go back to the query, and we're going to, actually, I can build it up here, or I can double click the number 1, and it just copies the parameters up here to the top. So I'm just going to change my value to be 1. I'm going to change the color to be the light blue. I'm going to change my label to be 11, and then add it. And you can just go through the whole sequence here. Oops. Well, notice I forgot the 2012, so I'm going to make this 2012. I'm going to make that gray. I want this to be 12, and I want these queries to be in the proper order. So what I really want is to insert what I have here at the top above line 3. So I'm going to highlight line number 3. I'm going to click the insert button, and it inserts the color coding instruction that I had at the top above line what was 3, so now they're in the proper order. Okay, if I click on OK, now we have all the different colors for the years that we have set up, and here's the legends that we have at the bottom. And I can continue. Notice that when I came on back to the screen, I don't have the color coding instructions here at the top, but again, I can just double left click on the 4, it copies it up, and I can just continue with these instructions And let's assume this is enough. At this particular point, I just want to have another color for all those leases, in this case, that are greater or equal to 2015. I'll have that this color. We'll say 2015 plus is going to be the legend label. I click on Add. So if I click OK now, notice I have colors for all the leases for 2010, 11, 12, 13, and then for all those leases that are equal to or greater than 2015 are this color. Okay. Notice that I have some tenants over here that are white. These are the vacant tenants. And if I come back to my spreadsheet, I don't have any expiration date for the vacant spaces. So I have to set up a different color coding instruction for them. Notice that I can come over here to the query button. It gets me to the same screen as I was using before. Personally, I like to go to the print preview and then make my changes from the print preview. So now we have to take care of the vacant space, and there's several ways of doing that. I can say if the name of the tenant equals vacant, I don't have to type in the whole name. Notice that the option that I'm using is it's not case sensitive and it's a partial name. So I could have VAC, VACA, whatever I want. We have some other options where it could just be the partial name, but it would have to be case sensitive, exactly, okay, or not case sensitive, but the exact name, like vacant. In our case, this no case partial gives me a lot of flexibility. I'm going to say the color is red. This represents my vacant space, and I'm just going to click on Add, so it adds it to the bottom of the list. So what the system is going to do is it's going to process the very first color coding instruction, and then the next one, the next one, the next one, all the way down to this last one. So if I click on OK, notice that all my tenants that have the name of vacant are red. I'm going to come back here to the spreadsheet. Notice that there's another column here. It's the status of the tenant. And if the tenant is vacant, the system automatically gives you a little frowning face over here, and also it says the status is vacant. So another way of setting up the color coding instruction would be to say if the status tenancy equals a V, then make it red, and I can give it another label of vacant. I can add this one, in which case I don't really need number 7, so I can highlight 7 on the left hand side, click on the delete button, delete it, and I end up with the same thing. Okay? Now if this is a set of color coding instructions that I want to use for other buildings, then I want to save these instructions as what's called a template. So just as we did on Tuesday, I'm going to click on C with the down arrow. I'm just going to indicate on the left side that I want to save the fill styles, which are the colors and patterns. I want the color coding instructions, which is a query criteria. I don't want the actual layout. I don't need report, and I'm going to say this is default class colors 2. And this is the physical name of the file. So you can actually send this to somebody else. Okay, so if I were to load a different template, here's one that I had done earlier, class colors new. So if I could load that one, then we have a totally different set of colors. If I go back and load the one that we just created, which is default colors class colors 2, we have what we had before. Now the colors, or the color coding instruction, doesn't have to be strictly expiration year or the status of the tenant or even the name of the tenant. You know, that it could be based on ranges of items. So let's delete these. Now we don't have any colors. I have a tenant over here called Maxim. What if I want to color code all Maxim one color, just to highlight it? I can come over here to query. I can say if the name of the tenant equals max, I want that to be green, and I'm just going to say Maxim, add it. And I can also say if the name of the tenant is not equal to max, then I want that to be yellow. We'll just say other. So now I have two color coding instructions. I'm saying if the name equals max, then it's going to be green. If it's not equal to max, then it's going to be yellow. Okay? So this is just another way of color coding the tenant spaces. What if we want to do ranges of ranges of expiration year? Let's just do that. I'm going to come back here to query. We'll get rid of these guys. I can say if the lease end is greater than or equal to 2010, then I want that to be green. But this is going to be a range of years. I can say 2010 through 2012. So my instructions here are for just the first part of this range, but I'm going to add here. Now I have to put the rest of it. So I'm going to say my directive is and if the lease end is less than or equal to 2012. Notice that my color is grayed out because I'm using and if. So now I've set up a combination query that says if the lease end is greater or equal to 2010 and less than or equal to 2012, then make it green. So if I were to click on OK, notice that these are all the leases that expire between 2010 and 2012. Here's my legend and the label. Now let's complete this. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say that if the lease end is greater or equal to 2013, and we'll have that yellow again, and we'll say that our range is going to be 2013 to 2015. So this next query, if you will, number 3, is the bottom part of that range. I'm going to come back here and just say and if it's less than or equal to 2015. I have my color over here, the label's the same. I'll click OK. So you can see in this particular case, really all the leases are color-coded except for the vacant space. So we could come back here and say that if the tenant name equals vacant, we'll have that red. I'll add it. Okay, here's our stacking plan. And again, if I want to use this for other buildings, not just this building, I'd want to save this as a template. Now, as I said, the color coding doesn't have to be based strictly on expiration year or the name of the tenant. It could be ranges of square footage. So the same idea. I'm going to delete these. And we can say that if the square footage, area total, is greater or equal to, well, let's actually just do this. If it's less than or equal to 5,000 by that green, and this is going to be a small tenant. And then we'll say if it's greater than 5,000, and this is going to be a mid-size. That's the first part of my second color coding instruction. And then we're going to say, and if it's less than or equal to 10,000, let's say. So my mid-sized tenants are anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. And then I can come on over here and do the top part and say if it's greater than 10,000 square feet. I want to have that, let's say blue, large space. We should have gotten everybody. Let's see if it's less than this, if it's greater than this. Whoops. I made a mistake over here, so I'm just double clicking in the bottom part and say this is less than or equal to. So now we have our query set up properly for square footage. We'd want to change the title up here in the header section to be colors, based on square footage or ranges of square footage, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Okay. So again, this is just another way of setting up your color coding. I was working with somebody earlier this morning. They wanted to basically show tenants in a particular pattern. I'm just going to load it and then I can explain it. We had created one called default leasing. And they just wanted to be able to show the tenants within the building. They also wanted to show the vacant space, and then they did have some spaces that were subleases. And we worked up two formats very quickly, something like this showing the number of occupied square feet on each floor. And then they really wanted to be able to have another image like this without these columns, because they wanted to be able to take this and bring it into an Excel spreadsheet and compare different buildings. So we just created another template, which was default leasing without the columns. Notice again, it's the same tenant information, but we just loaded different templates to display the information different ways. And then at this particular point, we went to image. We put it out to a clipboard. We used the option to actually control the size of the image. We could have made it transparent, but I didn't. Clicked on OK. We got into Excel, and I'm just going to scroll to the right, and that we just right-clicked, pasted it in, and then resized the image to the size that I wanted. And the other stacking line. So this might represent several different buildings in your downtown area that you want to be able to compare. Okay. Let's come on back to our class default or something like that. Anyway, actually, you can load several templates on top of each other. So I'm going to click on class default. That should at least get us back to the format that we had before. And then to get back to the colors that we had, I'm going to click on C with an up arrow and then go to the default class colors 2. And that gets us the colors that we had before. Now, here on the query section, notice that there's an option on the left-hand side to enable or disable some of these queries. So that if I don't want to use this one for vacancy, I can just click it here. And then the vacant spaces don't receive any type of color, or if they do, it's really the default color. So you can create a set of instructions with all the color coding instructions, and then maybe turn on or off some of these different instructions. To give you an idea, another thing that you can do, I'm going to go back here to close, we do have a column over here called option code. Again, this column, you could call it anything you want. I have S's here for subleases. So what if we wanted to set up a query where we color code by expiration year, but I have patterns on those spaces that have an S or that are a sublease? I'm going to come back here to the print preview. I'm going to come over here to the query section, and I'm saying at the very top, if the option code equals an S, then I want to have a pattern. This is a pattern I want to use. I'm going to, for a label, I'm going to say sublease. Now this is a special type query because I want my colors, but then I want a pattern on top of it. So we call this an overlay. So I'm going to click on Add. Now you can see all those spaces that have an S or a sublease have the pattern on them. Okay, so I still have the color for expiration year, but I have the pattern for the sublease. If I don't want this particular query, I can come back here to the query configure and then just temporarily disable it, in which case I don't have those patterns. So you do have normal type of queries or overlay queries. We talked about how you can set up a query for a range of things. These color coding instructions don't have to be based on expiration year. They could be based on square footages. Some people like to set up colors based on the expiration quarter. So you might set up ranges from January through March, if the lease expires in that time frame, and then from April through June, and so on. Okay. Now, if you want to add different colors, that's done with Edit Frames. I'm going to click here, and it's what you're doing is you're adding colors or patterns to the palette that can then be used later on. If you want to change one of the frames already, then you can just double left click, and then it brings up a different window for changing the colors or the borders and things of that nature. We'll just go through these right now, but let's just do it for a new one. So I'm going to click on Add New. I'm then going to say, well, this new color could be like an orange. If I click OK, now this is style, or this is frame number 28. I haven't used it anywhere, so I can come over here to frame to line number 1, and I can double left click, scroll down to the new one that we just created, number 28, and then if I say OK, then all those leases that expire in 2010 now are this orange color. So let's work with this a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to come over here to Edit Frame. I'm going to go down to frame number 28. If this is close to the color, but not exactly the color that I want, I can then, I clicked on Fill Colors over here, brought up the basic colors. I can click on Define Custom Colors, and that now I can move around the rainbow to come up with whatever color I want. I can change the hue. For some of you who have company colors defined as an RGB, with RGB numbers, you can just put in those numbers, and then you'd have the color that you want. If this is the color that we want, let's just come up with something else. If I click OK, and OK, I've used it over here, frame number 28, so I'm going to click OK, and now all those leases that expire in 2010, are this color. Let's look at some other options that are available for the colors. I can have a pattern on top of this, or I can make it solid. I can control the, in this case, the black line or the border around this particular color. I can make it wider. I can make it dotted or dashed. I can have a different color if I want to have the border the same color as the actual fill color. I can do that, or I can make it white. Well, let's make it yellow just so you can see it a little bit better. I can also indicate the edge that I want. Maybe I just want it to be on the top and the bottom. So I'm just unchecking these edges. So if I click OK, and OK, and OK, now you can see that the leases that expire in 2010 are this shocking color, amethyst, and that then we have a yellow border around it on the top and the bottom, but not on the side. Let's play with this some more. If I want, I can make it three-dimensional. I can indicate what type of shape that I want. I can make it a shadow or a box. I can control the shade corner. I can control the depth of it. And I just want to warn you, that if you, the deeper the depth, the smaller the space that's available for your tenant information. So, if I were to look at this and this, you can see the box that's the space that's available for the actual name of the tenant is too small. It's a little ridiculous. So we're just going to come back here, change this, 3D, have it something like that. Okay. Let's do a couple more things. Let's get rid of the pattern, or the border over here, or the three-dimensional. Let's just say none. You do have the ability to, in our particular case, we are having the text information within the tenant box bleed through the color, which is fine for colors, but if you were going to have a pattern instead, it'd be difficult to see the text information. So you can also undo the transparent check. And notice now we have a little box around where the text information would be. I can also control the color of the background. So if I were to come back to the stacking plan, and then notice that all those tenants that expire in 2010, the text information is highlighted with that white background so you could see it a little bit better. Now more and more companies seem to be going to very rich and deep blues and reds and so on. So as a result, notice that our text right now is black. And if I have a real dark color, let's just come on back over here, that I'm going to change this color to be black. Now if I do that, let's change the border to be black. And I can have the edges over here. Oops. Let's come back here, make it transparent. Now obviously I can't see the text for that is underneath the black color. So with the latest version of WinStack, you can have different color font for text for different color background colors. So let's do that. I'm going to come back here to query, edit frames. I want to go to number 28 because that's what I'm working with. And there's an option up here called text color, where I can say for my black background I want to have white text, and I want to override whatever the default is for the system. So now if I click OK, Notice that all those spaces that have that are black now have a white font for the text information. So in effect, you could do this for these other colors as well. So for those space or tenants that have this particular 17, I can change this so the text color might be a yellow. I want to override the standard color. I think I got the wrong color. It's number 12. Okay, so let's go back here to 12. Change this. Yellow. So again, what I'm just trying to show you is that you can now use those deep, rich colors and have different colored font for the text in those background with different background colors. Okay, and again, once I've done this, then I want to save this as a template that I can be using for other buildings. This is not really building dependent. I'm just going to be doing this for all my buildings or certain buildings. Okay, so I'm not giving it building ABC as a name. I'm just saying this is my default color 3. Okay, so if I want, I could load the default color 2. That's what we had initially. Or I can load the template, which is my default color class 3s. And I'm back to what I had before. Okay. Any particular questions that people might have for the color coding instructions? If you have any questions, let me know. And I see other people just come in. Okay. Any questions? Anybody have? Okay, so let's start talking about the actual formatting of the stacking plan. Okay, on Tuesday we talked about one aspect, which was this chart space form. And this allows you to control the text within the tenant box. Right now in the upper right hand area I'm showing the name of the tenant and the lease end date, and notice if I scroll to the right, this is the font that I'm using. You can see what it looks like for my tenant number 1 right now. Okay, if I want to show the square footage, then up here in the upper left hand side is a list of the items that you can display. So I'm going to scroll down to area total or square feet. I'm going to double left click and it brings it up to the upper right hand side. Now notice that it set it up as an Arial 10. I want to make it an 8. So just make sure that that particular line is highlighted. I can click on the font button, change my size to be 8. I can use any font that's available. I'm just not limited to the ones that you see over here. As a default, I can change the color. As a default, I can make it bold or italicized. I'm just going to make it 8. So now I have a number over here which represents my square footage, but it'd be nice if we had some type of label. So again, in the middle of the this window, I could put a label either before or after the value. In this case, I want it to be after. I'm going to put a space and then SF for square feet. Notice, as we talked about on Tuesday, I can move it to different locations. We're back in the middle. I can also put it on the same line as the previous item by clicking on with previous, and then it sort of slams it together down here on that line. So I'm just going to put a couple spaces before the value to separate it. So if I click OK, now notice for these tenants that I have the expiration date and the square footage on the same line. Okay, if I want to put it back on separate lines, then I can just highlight area total and then undo that with previous. I can get rid of those extra spaces that I had before. And now we have these items on the third line, or on 3 different lines. Okay? So that's how you go about changing the text within the tenant boxes. It's applicable for all the tenants. As an aside, some of you, especially if you're going to be walking buildings and not sure of the square footage of the tenants, you need at least 1 square footage for the tenant. If the tenant does not have any square footage, in other words, if it's 0, that tenant, this management office, is not going to display on the stacking plan. He has to have at least 1 square footage. If you have 1 square footage, the tenant will show let me scroll to the right. But notice that we're not showing any square footage of the tenant. This system has been set up so that if the square footage of the tenant is 1, then we're going to display the tenant, but we are not going to display a label or just 1 foot. Okay? Let's get to the heart of the formatting area, which is this configure chart section. And we have different sections here: general, header, footer, floor, and so on. If I move this over, the header controls the top of the stacking plan, footer controls the bottom of the stacking plan, floor controls the columns on the left and the right hand side, and general and building are just additional items or options that you have. We're in the general section right now. If I click on space, that brings me to this chart space form. So rather than coming over here to this icon, this basically comes up with the same thing. I can click on frames, and that brings me up to that edit frame, a window that we had used with the query configuration. Page gives you some flexibility with regard to how you want, what's the orientation of this particular stacking plan. Is it going to be in a portrait mode or a landscape mode? Right now I have it in a landscape mode. If I click on portrait, and now the building, you can see it lengthwise. So if you have a tall building, you might want to change your orientation to be portrait rather than landscape. Now again, the space that's available for the stacking plan is a little bit smaller. So you're always going to have sort of a trade-off between the size of the building and the size of the piece of paper that you have for displaying the stacking plan. If you want to show this on a larger size piece of paper, you can get back to the spreadsheet, click on File, Print Setup, and that indicate then maybe you have legal size paper or something like that. So then the system would set up the stacking plan accordingly. Now you do have the ability also to display the stacking plan over several pages high or wide. So if I want to show this, if I'm trying to do the Empire State Building, that I might have to have this on several pieces of paper. So I can indicate I want to have it too high in case when I show my stacking plan. And then I have some extra buttons over here on the upper right hand side. I'm looking at the page 1 of 2 right now. If I click on next page, then I see the bottom part. The only problem with this particular option is that it slices one of the floors in half. So what you'd have to do is paste that floor, the pieces of paper together. I'm going to go back and just make this one high. We'll keep it in portrait for right now. Now on the general section, especially if you have the latest version of WinStack, then we have additional options to show the square feet of space that rolls over year by year, as well as the percent with some type of decimal place. So I'm going to have 1 decimal place. I can also, if I wanted to change the label that's going to be displayed on the left hand side, I'm going to say percentage. And if I click OK, I'm just going to scroll down so you can see it better. Now under each legend box, I'm showing the label, and then I'm showing the number of square feet that expire, as well as the percentage with 1 decimal place. If I want to also see the number of tenants that are in each of those categories, then I can click over here, and now we're seeing the number of tenants that are affected. In this particular example, I have legends for all the years, and I have activity in each year. In a lot of cases, you might have your color coding instructions for 2010, 11, 12, and so on, and you might have some legend boxes over here without any activity. So there's an option here called Only Show Matching, where if you check that, then it's only going to show those legend boxes where you have some type of activity. In our case, it's not really applicable. I'm going to come up with the same thing. Okay, so if you have the latest version of the WinStack system, that you have these options, so it's just make it very, very easy for setting up the number of square feet that expire year by year and have it lined up automatically under the legend boxes. The next section we want to talk about is the header section, and that this is what controls the text at the top of the stacking plan. Right now we have 2 lines. One line just has BN, and this is a variable. Okay, remember we're talking about a template. I don't want to have the name of the building right here as ABC Tower, because that would be applicable for all the buildings that use this template. So I'm using a variable called BN. If I click where it says insert variable, here's a list of all these different variables. So I can input information on another window for the building city, or the address line 1, or the state, or the zip, and then the system would display that information. If I scroll down, you can see that the one that I'm using is building name, or BN. So you can just pick from this list if you want. This information would be in the configure building window. I'm going to come over here. This is our landmark. If I change this to be class tower, I can also click where it says address, and I can put in 123 Main Street, and we'll just say San Diego, California. Okay, so I have this additional information in the building address window under configure building. Now the information did not change up here, or wasn't displayed, other than the name of the building now is class tower rather than landmark. So let's put in the actual address. So I'm going to go back to configure chart. I'm going to insert a row up here, and I can pick just by clicking on insert variable. I want to show the building address line 1. I want the font to be, let's assume it is Arial. I want it to be bold, maybe 16 point, and we'll keep it as black so you can see the difference. Okay, I can click on preview so you can see what it's going to look like. Let's add another one because we wanted to see the building city, so I can come over here to building city. I can put a comma, a couple of spaces, and then I can insert variable, and I can go to building address state, and then again my font I want to be Arial. I want it to be 14, maybe a little bit smaller. We'll just have a different color just to be jazzy over here. And there's my stacking plan with showing the name of the building, the address line 1, and then the city and state with a comma over here. Okay? If I were to come over here to the building configure and change my address to be 123 State Street, then this changes automatically. Okay. You can also manually type in these names, so I could just get rid of these and type in %, building address city, comma, percent means it's a variable, building address state. And I come up with the same thing. You can have logos up here. Notice that I have the WinStack logo over here. You can click where it says logo. If I want this in the upper left hand side, I can choose the logo that I want. Maybe I have a different logo over here. This is a different logo for WinStack. And maybe in the upper right hand side, I'd like to have a picture of the building so that I can come out over here. Here's a small building. And here's the building in the upper right hand side. I can make this bigger if I wanted to by adding lines, or I can make it a little smaller. If I delete line number 6, then there's less space for that image to be displayed. Okay, so that's basically how you control the header. Notice I do have a red line around here. That's considered fill. If I don't want to see it, if I click here, you can see this is pretty much the same window that we had for the colors for the color coding instructions. If I don't want to have, if I want to have a different color for the border, I can just choose a different color. Whoops, that was fill. Sorry. The border I want to have blue. And I have a blue color. If I don't want that border at all, I can just uncheck the fill. And if I don't want the picture of the building, I can just undo the right logo. So now I have the WinStack icon. This could be your logo for whatever company you want, and then we don't have a picture over here, and I don't have that blue line around here. Okay, now the footer information is basically the same. In this particular case, the only thing that I'm really showing in the footer section is something that says prepared professionally on %D. %D is another variable to display today's date, and we have different formats of that over here. Okay? Floors, this section controls the columns on the left and the right hand side of the stacking plan. Here's my left side. Here's my right side. Let's take a look at these. Right now there's 3 sections to each column. There's a header section, and that's where I'm getting the word floor. You could see this is floor. It's Arial 10, bold, and underlined. And then on a floor-by-floor information, I'm using a variable called FN, which is floor name. So if the floor names are in the building configure window, so whatever that floor name is in that window is going to be displayed on the left-hand side of the stacking plan. And then we don't have anything in the footer section. To give you an idea, if I come over here to building configure, I can change the name of floor number 1 to be ground. And notice that my floor name is different now. Now, as I said, I'm showing the floor name. There's another variable called floor ID, which will just show the floor number, if you will. So if and I can make that a little bit narrower because I don't need the space for the floor name. And now I just get these numbers on the left-hand side. Let's look at the right side. Right now I have 2 columns. Really the only thing I have in column A is the building total in the footer section, and that's where we're getting these words in the lower right section. And then on the second column, or column B, that in my header section, I have the word area. I can just change this to be square feet if I wanted to. I'm using a variable called FA, which is floor area. This is the sum of the square footage of the tenants on the floor. BA, you can figure it out, is building area. This is the sum of the square footage of the tenants in the entire building. That's where I'm getting these numbers. Okay? Now if you want to add some other columns, Then you just click on the column, and then I want to insert a column. Maybe this is going to be the occupied space, so I can just type in occupied square feet. That's going to be in my header section. On a floor-by-floor basis, I want to show the floor area occupied, so I can click on Insert Variable. I can go down to the floor variables and pick up the one that says Floor Area Occupied, which is FAO. And then over here, I really want the building area occupied. I'm just going to type it in, %VAO. I'm just going to highlight this column. I'm going to make it right justified. I'm going to make it 10 point. And then for my header, I'm just going to click here and make it bold and underline. Make this a little bit narrower. So now I have two columns. I'm showing the square footage of the tenants on the floor, and I'm showing the occupied square footage. Now, we have a lot of different variables that can be used for displaying all types of information. Okay, and I'm just trying to give you a feel for how things work right now. If you have some a need for formatting this and you have some questions about it, then just give us a phone call. You can actually set up calculations as well, so that if I wanted to, I could subtract my floor area occupied from my floor area to come up with my vacant space. We actually have a variable for that, but I can just type in vacant square feet. I can set up a variable called calc, and then you set up your algorithm, which is basically going to be my floor area minus my floor area occupied. And I can do the same thing down here. Building area minus building area occupied. Okay, and that we'll make it right justified. We'll make it 10 point. And that, and then we'll make this bold and underline. Yeah. Right justified. Okay, so now I'm showing the vacant space on each floor. So, you can set up these different configuration files or formats to suit your particular needs. Let's come over here to the building section, and we have different things that we can use over here. We have some small tenants in this building, so we have a little override where it says minimal displayable space area, where I'm saying any tenant that's 2,000 square feet or less, make it look like 2,000 square feet. If I didn't have that there, then you can see the small tenants in our building that are maybe 1,500 square feet or 800 square feet. I can barely read the text information. So we may want to override that. And 2,000 seems to be a pretty good number, but it's a user, it's arbitrary. I can make it 3,000 if I want. So I'm saying any small tenant that's 3,000 square feet or less, make it look like 3,000 square feet. So the smaller tenants look a little bit larger so I can read the text information. Things are still pseudo-proportional, however. Okay? Right now, if we go back to our stacking plan, notice that I've shaped the stacking plan like the building. And if I come over here to the building configure window, then I've actually manually typed in what I want the floor plates to be. I can come over here to the first floor, make this 25,000 square feet. And now I have a little footer at the bottom of the stacking plan, because the option that I'm using, I've unchecked where it says auto maximum. If I check this, it's going to make the building look like a big rectangle. So if you're not sure of the square footage of the floors, your default probably is going to be this auto maximum clicked on. Right now the tenant boxes are based on the size or the square footage of the tenants. We do have another option over here called Auto Equalize that will shape or control the size of the tenant boxes not based on the square footage but based on the number of tenants on each floor. So here on the 12th floor I have 5 tenants that each take up a fifth of the space. On the 9th floor I have 3 tenants, so they take up each a third. So the size is not based on the square footage, it's based on the number of tenants on the floor. I can come back here and uncheck that. If you have a tall building, it might be difficult to see some of the text information within the tenant boxes. I could go back to this chart space form over here to control the text and make the text smaller, but a faster way of doing it is to come back here to Configure Chart in the Building section, and I can control the font here. Even though my font is supposed to be 8-point, I'm showing it as 70% of that. If I want, I can make it 50%, in which case the font for all the tenants is that much smaller. So this would be one way of controlling the size of the font within the tenant boxes. In our stacking plan, let's go back to, I'll uncheck the auto maximum. Our stacking plan right now then is, if you will, center justified. I do have the ability with the building section to indicate I want it to be left justified, in which case the building is justified to the left or to the right or back in the middle. Okay, now you can also show a couple other things. If you want to show elevator banks within the building, then you'd come over here to the building configure section and you'd add elevators just by clicking on where it says add. And let's assume we have 2 elevator banks. The first one starts in the 1st floor and goes to the 10th floor, and I want that color to be green. And then the next one's going to go from the 9th floor to the 19th floor, and I want that to be green. I want to save this, come on back. Now the elevators are not shown because I haven't told the system to display them, so I'm going to come over here to Configure Chart. I'm in the building section. I'm going to show my elevators on the left hand side of the stacking plan, and there are elevators. I can do it also on the right hand side or not at all. Now after I have slaved over all these changes, if this is a format that I want to use for other buildings, then again I want to just click on C with a down arrow. We'll call this class number 6. I want to save everything, so I want to save my fill colors, I want to save my query, my color coding instructions, I want to save the chart items, which is the actual format of the stacking plan. And I'm going to call this class 6. So now I've created a configuration file called class 6. If I come on back to the stacking plan, I can load a different template. Sorry. And we can just go with our original class format. Notice this is in landscape mode, that the colors are totally different. I don't have all that stuff on the right hand side, but if I click on C with an up arrow and then go to default class 6, this is a template that we just slaved over. I have this new format, and this is applicable for any building that I want. So I can load other buildings and then load that template, and I get the exact same format. So use of the templates really facilitates the use of the system, makes it a lot faster and easier, and also helps you come up with a consistent format. That's really about it for the class right now. There's a lot more that we could really be talking about. If you have any specific questions, now is a good time to ask those, or give me a call afterwards. You can see you should have received an email earlier today with our email address as well as the support number. If you didn't, give me a call and I can send it to you. Our support number is 760-434-2180, and the email address is ted@winstack.com. If you don't have the most recent version of the WinStack system, or you've seen some features here that you don't have in your system, especially with these items over here under the general section, why don't you give me a call? We can talk about what's involved with getting current with support and upgrades to the system. Okay, you guys have been a great class. Appreciate you being here, and look forward to working with you and supporting you with WinStack.